In this quick tutorial, I want to demonstrate how I made this little loading animation. So let's jump right in. Okay, so I'm starting with my default Blender scene, and the first thing that I can do is I can delete this lamp and this default cube, because I won't be using them. And then I'm going to start by modeling out this ring. And the way I'll do that is I'll go to Mesh, Circle, and I'll create a circle with 64 vertices, something sufficiently high so that you get a nice round circle. Tab into Edit mode. I'm going to E to extrude the circle, and then S to scale it in to about 0.8. Extrude it again, and then right click, Alt-M to merge the vertices at the center. And I need to flip the normals around. And the next thing I'm going to do is select this outer ring by Alt right clicking, E to extrude, scale it up to about here, about 2.5. And then what I'll do is I'll start merging these vertices so that I get a nice square. Alright, now that I have this shape, I will go into face select mode, select this inner loop of faces and delete them. And if I tab out of edit mode, we can see where I'm at. I've got a nice plate with a circle cut right through the middle of it. And I'm going to use this plate as a mask. But before I do that, I want to set up my camera real quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into top view, press the number pad decimal button to center my view over this geometry, and press Control Alt number pad 0. And that's going to position the camera right on top of this plate. And then I'm going to set my render resolution to 512 by 512. You can make that whatever you want, of course, but for presentation purposes, I think that'll work pretty well. I'm going to go into the camera tab and switch from perspective to orthographic. And then change the orthographic scale to about 5. So by changing the camera to orthographic, instead of getting this, perspective view, I just get this flat on, straight top down view. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add a plane, and this is going to act as this is basically going to be the color of the ring. So if I add a plane, and I'll scale it up to about 2.5 Blender units, I think will work. And I want to move this mask plate up a little bit, and just to help visualize, I'm going to turn on the wireframe for these. So I've got my mask plate on top and my matte plate underneath it. If I go into the materials, and I'll create a new material for this bottom matte plate, I'll make it blue. Something like this, and what I need to do is I need to change this to shadeless. That way it doesn't need a light in order to show its color. So if I press F12 right now, we get a black background with this nice blue ring in the middle. So I'll create a new material for this. This will be my mask material. And the only thing I need to do is enable transparency, change it from Z transparency to mask, and set the alpha all the way down to 0. And basically what this does is anything that's behind this plate, it's just going to make invisible, and it's just going to show the background. So now when I press F12 and I render, we get the gray background. So that's how I know that it's just showing the world background. And again, for presentation purposes, I will set this something a little bit off-white. So the next element that we need to add is kind of a Pac-Man shape, and it's what we're going to use to animate the opening and closing angles. So I will jump into a new layer just for a sec, and I'm going to add a plane, tab into edit mode, and I'm going to delete the bottom 2 vertices, and then I'm going to move this vertice right to the origin. And this vertice, I'm going to move out to about 2.5 Blender units. And then if I tab out of edit mode, we can see I just have this line segment. If I go to my modifiers and add a screw modifier, that will give me a nice disc with which I can animate the angle really easily just by dragging this angle slider. The steps, I'll set it to 8, but I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as it's, you know, high enough to maintain the fidelity of the circle with the bigger angle. I'll just set this to 90 for a second because now we're going to jump into the trickier bit of this animation. And the way that I'm going to animate this arc is with the use of custom properties and drivers. So if I go into the object tab with this arc selected, I'll go ahead and give it a name. I'll call it Pac-Man. Go all the way down to custom properties, and I'm going to add 2 new custom properties. This one is going to be called angle 1. Property value of 0. The min and max don't really matter, but I'll set them big enough just so that I have some room to move. Press OK. And this one is going to be angle 2. And same exact deal. And so now I've got 2 properties that I can slide around and animate how I want to. So the next thing I'm going to do is set up the drivers. I'm going to have 2 drivers on this. I'm going to have a driver on the screw modifier angle, so I'll right click on that, add driver, and then I'm going to have a driver on the Z rotation. So right click, add single driver. So I've got my 2 drivers set up, they're indicated as purple. And if I split my view and go over to the graph editor, switch the mode to drivers, press N to bring up the properties panel, and I will start hooking these up. I'll start with the angle driver. So what I want to do is I want to basically hook up angle 1's value with the angle of the screw modifier. So the way that I'll do that is I will scroll down here. I'm going to use a scripted expression, and I'm going to add a new variable. I'll call this variable angle 1. It should be a single property, and then if I select my Pac-Man object, and then I have to specify which property I'm using. So the way that you access these, oh, I just realized I named this wrong. Should be angle 2, okay. Anyway, the way that you access custom properties here is you do a square bracket, quotation mark, angle, or the name of the property, so angle 1, and then closing square bracket. So now you see if I change angle 1 down here, it's also changing the value of this variable up here. So if I go, now I can plug this variable into my scripted expression up here. So angle 1. And now as I change angle 1, we can see it's affecting the screw angle up here. But you can see if I set this to something like 90, instead of it being a nice right angle, it's being rotated quite a bit, and that's because it is converting between degrees and radians. So in order to get this angle measurement as radians, I simply type radians, open parentheses, angle 1, closing parentheses, and that will convert this 90-degree value to radians. So now if I do things like 100 or 180 degrees and 270 degrees, we're getting the value that we expected. So if I set this back to 0, we have basically no sweeping angle. But I want the opposite to be true. I want it so that when angle 1 is set to 0, we have a full sweeping angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going, in my expression, change it from radians of angle 1 to radians of 360 minus angle 1. So now, as I change angle 1, the sweep angle gets smaller. And that's the way that I want to use this. So I'll put this on 90 for a second. And now I'm going to work on my second driver for the Z rotation of this Pac-Man object. And this one I'm going to use angle 2. So I'll rename this variable to angle 2, set it as a single property variable, select my Pac-Man, and then select the custom property by typing in angle 2. Okay, and then in my expression, I will do radians of angle 2. Now as I change angle 2, we can see this Z rotation starts to change. But what I want to have happen are two more things. The first thing I want to have happen is as angle 2 increases, I want it to spin clockwise instead of counterclockwise. So in my expression, I'm just going to do negative radians of angle 2. So that's that problem solved. And the second thing is that when angle 2 changes, I don't want angle 1 to move. Or in other words, right now, angle 1 is kind of setting it up like this. And when angle 2 changes, I want it so that it maintains that position. And the way that I do that is I go back to my screw angle driver, add another variable, and I'm going to add angle 2. So I'll set it up the same way that I had on my other one. Just angle 2, and all I need to do is do radians 360 minus angle 1 plus angle 2. Now, as angle 1 changes, as angle 2 changes, this will lock in place, and that's exactly what I want. So, I will set these both back to 0, and now we can actually begin doing some animation. So the first thing I'm going to animate is the Pac-Man jaw, if you will. So I'll switch back down to F curve, and I'm going to, on frame 0, basically what's going to happen is angle 1's going to change, angle 2 is going to chase it, angle 1, angle 2, angle 1, angle 2, until it makes its way back to where it started. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to, first of all, change my timeline to 90, because I want this to happen in 3 steps. So basically it's going to go from here to here, and then it will be back where it started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set angle 1 to 30 degrees. That's going to be where it starts at on frame 1, and I'll add a keyframe. And then I'm going to move forward 15 frames, and I'm going to push it forward 120 degrees. So I'll do 30 plus 120 degrees to give me 150 degrees. And then I'll add a keyframe. And on this same keyframe, frame 16, I'll add a keyframe for angle 2. And then I'll go to frame 30 and move angle 2 forward 120 degrees. And if I add a keyframe, we can see what happens when I've done that. So angle 1 moves, and then angle 2 chases after it. Now, starting on frame 30, I'll add a keyframe to angle 1, move forward another 15 frames, add another 120 degrees, insert a keyframe for angle 2, move forward 15, add another 120 degrees to angle 2, and if I look at my curves, we can see we're kind of just stair-stepping our way to a full revolution. So, if I just do this one more time, move forward 15 frames, increase angle 1 by 120 degrees, add a keyframe to angle 2, and finally move to 90 degrees and add 120 to angle 2. We'll start to see what happens, and this should loop perfectly. So angle 2 is always just kind of chasing angle 1. Okay. And right now we've got a linear interpolation, so it's starting and stopping very suddenly. But I want that to be nice and smooth, so I'm going to use cubic easing. I'll change all of these to cubic, and I will change them to ease and out. And I'm doing this by pressing T to change my interpolation, selecting cubic, and then Control E to set the easing. So I want it to be easing in and out. And these are also accessible in this side properties panel right here. So T cubic, Control E, ease in and out, Control E, ease in and out. So now it should be a little bit smoother. It's got a nice acceleration and deceleration. So we are actually almost done. If I if I bring back the rest of my scene and I move this up just below my ring mask, and we look from top down, we should be able to see kind of what's happening. And the one thing that I forgot to do is I forgot to give this Pac-Man shape the mask material as well. So now anything that it occludes will also be transparent. So we get this nice inching around the circle, and to give this a little bit more motion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent this Pac-Man object to an empty. So if I do that real quick here, right click, Control P, parent to object. Now as this empty spins, the Pac-Man will spin with it, so I can go to frame 1, add a keyframe on this empty on frame 1, go to frame 90 and add another keyframe. Then I will select this second keyframe in my graph editor, and for its value I will set it to 360 degrees times 3. So basically in one full loop of this animation, this empty is going to spin around 3 times. And if I look at that, we can see it's, it starts to spin. I want this to spin clockwise, so what I really need to do is negative 1080 degrees. And I also want this to be linear. I don't want it to ease in and out, so that, it's a nice, even, continuous motion. It doesn't start and stop. So we can see if we pair these two motions together, then we start to get the effect that I'm looking for. And if I bring back the rest of my scene, we can see that it's spinning around the disc really, really nicely. So I'll go ahead and render out a test animation just so we can see what we're looking at here. Since we're not using any kind of shading or lighting materials, these render out really, really quickly, which is nice. All right, so if I preview this back, yeah, we start to get a nice smooth animation. The next thing that I want to do, and I guess I should mention, you can kind of tweak this a little bit. So if I change angle 1, if I select it in the graph editor, select this entire curve, and by moving this up or down, I can kind of change how much of the blue is exposed. So if I move this up, more of the blue is exposed. And if I move it down, less of it gets exposed. So I kind of like it at 30 degrees, so I'm going to leave it there. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to take this blue matte material that I have, and I'm going to add some more colors to it. So I'll go into edit mode, subdivide it, and then add different materials to these 4 faces. So let me just create some new materials real quickly. Red and yellow and green. Get these colors. Red, yellow, and green. Okay, so I will assign a different color to each one of these faces. And just by doing that alone, we can kind of see what that's gonna look like. It's definitely more interesting, but you'll also notice that it's a little static with the colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also rotate my matte material. So I'll go to frame 1 and insert a keyframe on the Z rotation, add single keyframe, go to frame 90, add another keyframe, and then on this second keyframe, I'm going to give this a value of 360 degrees times 3. So basically 3 rotations in the span of the animation. And I'll set this to linear as well. So now it is just rotating counterclockwise at a constant rate. And when I pair this with the rest of the animation, you get a really interesting result because everything else is moving clockwise, but the color is moving counterclockwise. And I will render this out so that we can have a look at it. All right. And this is this is pretty much the effect that I want. One final thing that I will do is I will add some motion blur. So if I go to my render settings, sampled motion blur, enable that and give it anywhere from 4 to 12 samples. This will take a little bit longer to render, but I think it adds a really, really nice effect. So, all right, and now you can see we end up with this really nice loading animation. So I hope you learned something in this tutorial, and I hope to